When I was younger and more sensitive, my father gave me advice that I have thought about many times. He said, if you want to criticize someone, remember that not everyone has had the same chances as you. He did not explain more, but we often understood each other without many words. Because of this, I try not to judge people quickly. This habit helped me understand many strange people, but it also caused some to find me boring. People with unusual minds noticed this in me and thought I was a politician because I knew their secret problems. Many people shared these secrets without me asking. Sometimes I pretended to be asleep or busy when I saw that someone wanted to tell me a private story, because young men often tell these stories in a complicated way and hide parts of the truth. Not judging others is a way of having hope. I still worry that I might miss something important. If I forget what my father said, that fairness is not given equally to everyone at birth. Even though I am proud of my tolerance, I know it has limits. People's behavior can be based on strong or weak foundations, but after a while, I stop caring why. When I returned from the East last fall, I wanted the world to be calm and morally strict forever. I did not want to see wild actions or secret feelings anymore. Only Gatsby, the man this book is about, was different for me. He represented something I both admired and disapproved of. If personality is a series of successful actions, Gatsby had something amazing about him. He was very sensitive to the possibilities in life, like a machine that can feel earthquakes from far away. This was not just creativity, but a special gift of hope and romantic readiness that I have never seen in anyone else and probably never will again. In the end, Gatsby was a good person. What affected him was the bad things around his dreams that made me lose interest in the small sorrows and short happiness of people. My family has been well known and wealthy in this Midwestern city for 3 generations. The Carraways are like a close group, and we have a story that we come from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But the real founder of my family was my grandfather's brother. He came here in 1851, sent someone else to fight in the Civil War, and started the hardware business that my father now runs. I never met this great uncle, but I am told I look like him, especially in a serious painting that hangs in my father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, about 25 years after my father, and later I fought in the Great War. I enjoyed the fighting so much that I returned feeling restless. Instead of feeling that the Midwest was the center of the world, it now seemed like the edge of the universe, so I decided to move east and learn the bond business. Everyone I knew worked in bonds, so I thought there was room for me too. My aunts and uncles talked about it as if choosing a school for me, and finally agreed with serious faces. My father agreed to support me for a year, and after some delays, I moved east in the spring of 1922, thinking I would stay for good. It made sense to find rooms in the city, but since it was warm and I had just left a place with big lawns and trees, a young man at work suggested we rent a house together in a town nearby. He found a small old house for $80 a month, but at the last minute, his company sent him to Washington, so I went to the countryside alone. I had a dog, but he ran away after a few days, and an old Dodge car and a Finnish woman who cooked and cleaned for me while talking quietly to herself in Finnish. I was lonely at first until one morning, a man who had arrived more recently than me stopped and asked how to get to West Egg Village. I showed him the way, and after that, I did not feel lonely. I felt important, like a guide or a first settler. The sunshine and new leaves growing on trees made me feel life was starting again. With summer, there was so much to read and so much fresh air to enjoy. I bought many books about banking, credit, and investments, and they looked like new money, promising to reveal secrets known only by the richest people. I also wanted to read many other books. In college, I had been quite literary and had even written serious editorials for the Yale News. Now, I wanted to bring that part of my life back and become a well-rounded man. This is not just a phrase. Life is often better understood by focusing on one thing. It was by chance that I rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. This place was on a narrow, lively island just east of New York. On this island, there are two unusual pieces of land shaped like eggs. These eggs are about 20 miles from the city, very similar in shape, and separated only by a small bay. They stick out into the calm salt water of Long Island Sound, which is like a big, quiet barnyard of water. The eggs are not perfect ovals, they are a bit flat on one end, like the egg in the story of Columbus. This similarity must confuse the seagulls flying above, but for people without wings, the eggs look very different in everything except shape and size. I lived in West Egg, which was the less fashionable of the two eggs. This is a simple way to describe the strange and somewhat dark differences between them. My house was at the very tip of West Egg, only 50 yards from the water, squeezed between two huge houses that rented for $12,000 to $15,000 a season. The house on my right was very large and looked like a famous town hall in Normandy with a tower. Fresh ivy on the walls, a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. That was Gatsby's mansion. I didn't know Mr. My own house was ugly but small and unnoticed, so I had a view of the water, part of my neighbor's lawn, and the comforting closeness of rich people, all for $80 a month. Across the small bay, the white houses of East Egg shone along the water. And the real story of the summer began the evening I drove there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my distant cousin, and I had known Tom at college. After the war, I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Tom was very athletic and had been one of the best football players at New Haven, famous in his own way. His family was very rich. He was known for spending money freely even in college, but now he had left Chicago and moved east in a way that impressed people. For example, he brought polo horses all the way from Lake Forest. It was hard to believe someone my age was that rich. I don't know why they moved east. They had spent a year in France without any special reason, then moved restlessly wherever rich people played polo. Daisy said on the phone that this move was permanent, but I didn't believe her. I couldn't see into Daisy's heart, but I felt Tom would always move on, quietly hoping to find excitement like in a great football game he could never return to. One warm and windy evening, I drove to East Egg to visit two old friends I hardly knew. Their house was more impressive than I expected. A bright, red and white, Georgian colonial mansion that looked out over the bay. The lawn started at the beach and stretched a quarter of a mile to the front door, crossing sundials, brick paths, and colorful gardens. And when it reached the house, it climbed up the side with bright green vines, as if moving from its own momentum. The front of the house had a row of French windows, glowing with reflected gold light and wide open to the warm, windy afternoon. On the front porch, Tom Buchanan stood with his legs apart wearing riding clothes. He looked different from his New Haven days. Now, he was a strong man in his 30s with straw-colored hair, a firm mouth, and a proud, confident way of carrying himself. His two bright, arrogant eyes made his face look as if he was always leaning forward, ready to fight. Even his fancy riding clothes could not hide his powerful body. His boots looked full and tight, and his muscles moved clearly under his thin coat. It was a body made for strength and control, a cruel body. His voice was rough and deep, adding to the feeling of toughness. It even had a slight fatherly disrespect, even for those he liked, and many men at New Haven hated him for this. He seemed to say, "Don't think my opinions are final just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you." And although we were not close friends, I always felt that he approved of me and wanted me to like him in his own tough way. We talked for a few minutes on the sunny porch. "I've got a nice place here," he said, looking around restlessly. Then, taking my arm, he showed me the front yard, which, including a sunken Italian garden, a large area full of strong-smelling roses, and a small motorboat resting near the shore. "It belonged to Demain, the oilman," he said, then politely turned me around, held gently by French windows at both ends. The windows were open and shining white against the green grass outside, which seemed to come a little way into the room. A breeze blew through, moving the curtains in and out like pale flags, twisting them toward the ceiling, and then flowing over the dark red carpet, making shadows like wind over the sea. In the room, the only thing that did not move was a huge couch where two young women were sitting as if they were floating on an anchored balloon. Both wore white dresses that moved gently, like they had just been blown back inside after flying around the house. I stood quietly for a moment, listening to the sound of the curtains and a picture on the wall creaking. Then, with a loud noise, Tom Buchanan closed the back windows and the wind stopped. The curtains, the carpet, and the two women slowly fell down. One of the women was a stranger to me. She was lying still at one end of the couch with her chin raised slightly, as if trying to balance something on it that might fall. If she saw me from the corner of her eye, she gave no sign. I was almost surprised and whispered sorry for disturbing her. The other woman, Daisy, tried to sit up with a serious look, but then laughed a small, funny, charming laugh. I laughed too, and moved into the room. She said, "I'm paralyzed with happiness." She laughed again like she had said something very clever. She quietly hinted that the other woman's last name was Baker. Some say Daisy whispered just to make people lean toward her. This was a criticism, but it did not make her less charming. Miss Baker's lips moved. She nodded almost without me noticing, which then quickly leaned back. Whatever she was balancing must have moved and scared her a little. I almost apologized again. I always respect people who seem completely confident. I looked at my cousin Daisy, who started asking me questions in a low, exciting voice. Her voice moved like music, making you want to listen carefully. Her face was beautiful but sad, with bright eyes and a passionate mouth. Singing, "Listen," a promise that she had done exciting things recently and that exciting things were coming soon. I told her about stopping in Chicago for a day on my way east and how many people sent their love. Through me. She cried happily. "Do they miss me?" I joked. "The whole town is empty. All the cars have one black wheel like a sign of mourning, and there is a sad noise all night along the shore." She said, "How wonderful! Let's go back tomorrow, Tom." Then she suddenly said, "You should see the baby." "I would like to. She's asleep. She's 3 years old." "Haven't you seen her?" "No." "Well, you should see her. She's..." Tom, who had been moving nervously around, stopped and put his hand on my shoulder. "What are you doing, Nick?" "I'm a bondman." "Who with?" I told him. "Never heard of them," he said strongly. That annoyed me. "You will," I answered shortly, "if you stay in the East." "Oh, I'll stay in the East, don't worry," he said, looking at Daisy then back at me, like he was waiting for something else. "Absolutely." It surprised me because it was the first thing she said since I came into the room. She seemed surprised too, because she yawned and quickly stood up with smooth movements. "I'm stiff," she said. "I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I remember." Daisy replied, "Don't blame me. I've been trying all afternoon to get you to go to New York." Miss Baker said no to 4 cocktails just brought from the pantry. "No, thanks. I'm training." Her host looked at her with surprise. "You are? How do you get anything done?" I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what she did. She was a slim girl with small breasts and a proud posture, throwing her shoulders back like a young soldier. Her tired grey eyes looked at me politely, but with curiosity, from a pale, charming but unhappy face. I thought I might have seen her or a picture of her somewhere before, she said with some dislike. You live in West Egg. I know someone there. I don't know anyone, I said. You must know Gatsby. Gatsby? Asked Daisy. Tom, holding my arm firmly, pulled me out like moving a piece on a chessboard. The two young women walked ahead of us to a pink porch open to the sunset, where 4 candles flickered in the light wind. Why candles? Daisy asked, frowning, and blew them out. In 2 weeks it will be the longest day of the year. She smiled brightly. Do you always wait for the longest day and miss it? I always do. We should plan something, said Miss Baker, yawning as she sat at the table like going to bed. Okay, Daisy said. What should we plan? She looked at me helplessly. What do people usually plan? Suddenly, she looked at her little finger and said, Look! I heard it! We all looked. Her knuckle was black and blue. You did it, Tom, she said angrily. I know you didn't mean to, but you did. That's what I get for marrying a big, strong, rough man. I hate that word hulking, said Tom, annoyed. Even when joking. Hulking, Daisy said again. Sometimes Daisy and Miss Baker talked at the same time, quietly and playfully, but not really chatting. They were calm like their white dresses and their cool, distant eyes. They accepted Tom and me politely, making small efforts to entertain or be entertained. They knew dinner, and the evening would soon end. It was very different from the West, where evenings rushed quickly, full of nervous waiting or disappointment. I said to Daisy on my second glass of wine, You make me feel uncivilized. Can't you talk about crops or something? I didn't mean much, but she answered in an unexpected way. Tom shouted angrily, Civilization is falling apart. I've become a pessimist. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by Goddard? No, I said, surprised. It's a good book and everyone should read it. It says if we don't watch out, the white race will be completely replaced. It's scientific and proven, Daisy said sadly, but without thinking. Tom reads serious books with big words. What was that word again? Tom impatiently said. These are scientific books. This man studied everything. It's our duty as the dominant race to be careful. Winking at the strong sun, Miss Baker started to say, You should live in California. But Tom interrupted by moving in his chair. The idea is, we are Nordics. I am, you are, and you are too, he said, nodding at Daisy, who winked again. We created everything that makes civilization, science, art, and all that. Do you understand? His focus was a little sad, like he wasn't happy with himself anymore. Then the phone rang, and the butler left the porch. Daisy took the chance and whispered to me, I'll tell you a family secret. It's about the butler's nose. Do you want to hear? That's why I came tonight, I said. She explained. He wasn't always a butler. He used to polish silver for a rich family in New York who had silver for 200 people. He had to quit, Daisy said. The last sunshine made her face glow romantically, and her voice made me listen carefully. Then the light faded, like children leaving a nice street at night. The butler came back and whispered something to Tom, who frowned, pushed his chair back, and went inside without speaking. Daisy seemed excited by his leaving, leaned forward and said warmly, I love having you at my table, Nick. You remind me of a rose, a perfect rose, a perfect rose. Don't you agree? She asked Miss Baker to confirm. This wasn't true. I'm not like a rose, but she was just speaking warmly from her heart. Suddenly, she threw down her napkin and went inside. Miss Baker and I exchanged a quick look with no meaning. Passionate murmur in the next room. Miss Baker leaned in to listen. The voices were close to being clear, rose and fell excitedly, then stopped. I said, "This Mr. Gatsby you mentioned is my neighbor. Don't talk. I want to hear." "Is something happening?" I asked. "You don't know?" Miss Baker was surprised. "Tom has a woman in New York." "A woman?" I asked, confused. She nodded. There was the sound of a dress and boots, and Tom and Daisy came back to the table. "It couldn't be helped," Daisy said nervously. She sat down, looked at Miss Baker and me, and said, "I looked outside. It's very romantic. There's a bird on the lawn. It must be a nightingale from the Cunard or White Starship." Then sadly added, "If it's light after dinner, I want to take you to the stables." The phone rang loudly inside, and Daisy shook her head at Tom. The talk about stables, and all other talk, disappeared. I remember the candles being lit again for no reason. I wanted to look at everyone, but also avoid their eyes. I couldn't tell what Daisy and Tom were thinking. Even Miss Baker, who seemed skeptical, couldn't ignore the strange urgency in the room. To some it might be interesting. To me, I wanted to call the police right away. The horses were never mentioned again. Tom and Miss Baker walked back to the library as if watching over a real body, while I followed Daisy quietly around the connected verandas to the front porch. In the dark, we sat side by side on a wicker sofa. Daisy took her face in her hands as if feeling its lovely shape, and her eyes moved gradually out into the velvet dusk. I saw that turbulent emotions possessed her, so I asked what I thought would be some sedative questions about her little girl. "We don't know each other very well, Nick," she said suddenly, "even if we are cousins." "Well, I've had a very bad time, Nick, and I'm pretty cynical about everything." Evidently, she had reason to be. I waited, but she didn't say any more. What she didn't say any more. And after a moment, I returned rather feebly to the subject of her daughter. "I suppose she talks and eats and everything." "Oh, yes." She looked at me absently. "Listen, Nick, let me tell you what I said when she was born. Would you like to hear?" "Very much. It'll show you how I've gotten to feel about things." Well, she was less than an hour old, and Tom was God knows where. I woke up out of the ether with an utterly abandoned feeling, and asked the nurse right away if it was a boy or a girl. She told me it was a girl, and so I turned my head away and wept. "All right," I said, "I'm glad it's a girl, and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool. You see, I think everything's terrible anyhow," she went on in a convinced way. "Everybody thinks so, the most advanced people, and I know. I've been everywhere and seen everything and done everything." Her eyes flashed around her in a defiant way, rather like Tom's, and she laughed with thrilling scorn. "Sophisticated. God, I'm sophisticated," the instant her voice broke off, ceasing to compel my attention, my belief. I felt the basic insincerity of what she had said. It made me uneasy, as though the whole evening had been a trick of some sort to exact a contributory emotion from me. I waited, and sure enough, in a moment, she looked at me with an absolute smirk on her lovely face, as if she had asserted her membership in a rather distinguished secret society to which she and Tom belonged. Inside, the crimson room bloomed with light. Tom and Miss Baker sat at either end of the long couch, and she read aloud to him from the Saturday Evening Post. The words, murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tune. The lamplight, bright on his boots and dull on the autumn leaf yellow of her hair, glinted along the paper as she turned a page with a flutter of slender muscles in her arms. When we came in, she held us silent for a moment with a lifted hand. "To be continued," she said, tossing the magazine on the table. "In our very next issue, Her body asserted itself with a restless movement of her knee. 10 o'clock, she remarked, apparently finding the time on the ceiling. Time for this good girl to go to bed. Jordan's going to play in the tournament tomorrow, explained Daisy. I had heard some story of her too, a critical, unpleasant story. But what it was I had forgotten long ago. Good night, she said softly. Good night, Mr. Caraway. See you anon. Of course you will, confirmed Daisy. In fact, I think I'll arrange a marriage. Come over often, Nick, and I'll sort of, fling you together, and all that sort of thing. Good night, called Miss Baker from the stairs. I haven't heard a word. She's a nice girl, said Tom after a moment. They oughtn't to let her run around the country this way. Who oughtn't to? Inquired Daisy. Her family. Her family is one aunt about 1,000 years old. Besides, Nick's going to look after her, aren't you, Nick? She's going to spend lots of weekends out here this summer. I think the home influence will be very good for her. Daisy and Tom looked at each other for a moment in silence. Is she from New York? I asked quickly. From Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together there. Our beautiful white. Did you give Nick a little heart-to-heart talk on the veranda? Demanded Tom suddenly. Did I? She looked at me. I can't seem to remember, but I think we talked about the Nordic race. Yes, I'm sure we did. It sort of crept up on us, and first thing you know, don't believe everything you hear, Nick, he advised me. I said lightly that I had heard nothing at all, and a few minutes later I got up to go home. They came to the door with me and stood side by side in a cheerful square of light. As I started my motor, Daisy peremptorily called, Wait! I forgot to ask you something. And it's important. We heard that you were engaged. It's libel. I'm too poor. But we heard it, insisted Daisy, surprising me by opening up again in a flower-like way. We heard it from 3 people, so it must be true. Of course, I knew what they were talking about, but I wasn't really interested. One reason I had come east was because gossip had announced the wedding plans. You can't stop seeing an old friend just because of rumors. And I also had no plan to get married because of rumors. Their interest in me was kind in a way, and it made them seem less distant and rich. But still, I felt confused and a little upset as I drove away. It seemed to me that Daisy should have rushed out of the house holding her child, but she didn't seem to want to do that. As for Tom, it was less surprising that he had a woman in New York than that he was upset by a book. Something was bothering him, and he seemed to be thinking about old ideas again, as if his strong, confident self wasn't enough for his proud heart. It was deep summer already, with red gas pumps shining under lights at small roadside places. When I got home to West Egg, I parked my car in its shed and sat on an old grass roller in the yard. The wind had stopped, leaving a loud, bright night with wings beating in the trees and a steady sound like an organ as frogs filled the air with life. A cat's shadow moved in the moonlight, and when I turned my head to look, I saw I wasn't alone. About 50 feet away, a figure stood in the shadow of my neighbor's big house, hands in pockets, looking at the stars like silver pepper. His relaxed movements and firm feet on the lawn made me sure it was Mr. Storr, Gatsby, outside to see his part of the sky. I thought about calling to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, which would be a good way to introduce myself. But I didn't call. He suddenly seemed happy to be alone. He stretched his arms toward the dark water strangely, and even though I was far away, I could swear he was shaking. I looked out to sea and saw only a tiny green light, far away, maybe at the end of a dock. When I looked back, Gatsby had disappeared, and I was alone again in the restless darkness.